Hey folks, how you all doing? So today I'm really excited about doing this albums rankings. This is for my favourite rock band of all time, the Small Faces. You know, Kenny Jones, Ian McLagan, Ronnie Lane, the brilliant Steve Marriott. Four of the greatest musicians ever in the 1960s and 70s rock period. Um, and yeah, we're going to count down their 6 albums from my least favourite to favourite. Technically, they only had 5 UK albums, but one of their albums there was a US only release. That one has now been included as part of their official discography. Just like Magical Mystery Tour did with the Beatles, it was 2 EPs, double EP in England. So it wasn't an album, it was released as an album outside of the UK and become part of their official discography. That's the same with this album that will be in here as well. So technically 5 albums become 6 with the Small Faces. So at number 6 on the list, I have Playmates. That's this one here. It's their first reunion album. It was released in 1977. Was supposed to be the original lineup. However, due to interpersonal differences and problems that couldn't be sorted out during their original breakup, Ronnie Lane left the band and didn't come back after rehearsals. The band then recruited Rick Wills of Roxy Music and Peter Frampton's band to fill the gap. Now listen, this is a pretty good rock record. It's got a fistful of decent rock tunes, but I think there's a lack of a spark on this album, simply because the turmoil of the arguments in the rehearsals and Ronnie Lane leaving. So, it's still a really good album, even though it does lack that spark. Imagine how good it would have been if there was peace and, harmony within the band at that time. Best track on here for me is Never Too Late. The album comes in an excellent 7.5 out of 10. For a weakest album by a band, that's pretty damn good in my opinion. So at number 5 on my list, we have their 6th album, which is this one here. 78 in the Shade. It was released in 1978. It's their 6th and final album. It's the 2nd album of their reunion. So included on this album, you've got the band that were on the first one over here. Plus they've featured Wings guitarist Jimmy McCulloch on lead guitar duties on this album. It's a solid rock album. There's soft rock on here as well. There's slight leanings towards country as well. Favourite track on here for me is Too Many Crossroads. This album comes in a pretty good 8.5 out of 10, which for anyone's second weakest album in their catalogue is still pretty bloody good. So number 4 on my list, I have their 2nd album. It is self-titled. It was released in 1967. This one has a lot of Who, as in the band The Who, styled R&B, so maximum R&B on this album. It's interwoven with some Blue-Eyed Soul splashed in the mix. Excellent rock album. It sounds rough and ragged and raw even today. It's absolutely brilliant. This sort of grunge without even being grunge. It's just rough and ragged. Even go as far as say it's as rough and ragged as some of Neil Young Crazy Horse's early material. That's how good it is. Best track for me on here is Up the Wooden Hills to Bedfordshire. Love the Hammond organ, which is the main organ of choice throughout this track, even though guitars do take over every now and then. It's a beautiful piece of psychedelia, and coming from Bedfordshire, this just brings back quite a few memories of going through the wooden hills of Bedfordshire back in the day. This album would come in at 9 out of 10, and we still have 3 more to go. So my 3rd album, number 3 on my rankings of Small Faces albums, we have their debut. This is also called Small Faces, and it was released in 1967, just like This one was. However, it's a different record label. This second one here, this was on the Intermediate label. It was their first album on the Intermediate. This album was on the Deram label, sorry, and their manager at the time was Don Arden, who was known for ripping off bands. He screwed the band, ripped them off, left them with no money. That's why they left and went to Intermediate. If you guys thought that The Who's debut album, My Generation, was hot and heavy, take a listen to this. Or you obviously haven't heard this one if you think that one is so hot and heavy. This one absolutely shits all over The Who's debut album. Blistering guitars, great rock vocals. It's up there with the best. No wonder Jimmy Page asked Steve Marriott to front Led Zeppelin when he left the Small Faces. He could see the raw talent of rock vocals that were in this group, and he was a big fan of the Small Faces right back in their early days. That said, this is a late 1960s rock masterpiece of pure rock and roll. My favourite track on here is Sha-La-La-La-Lee, which was a single. It's one of the quietest tracks on here, actually, but when you look at clips on YouTube, it's actually quite heavy song, but it's one of the quietest songs on here. But it has got a bit of a Manfred Mann vibe to it, Sha-La-La-La-Lee. Anyway, this one comes in again at a brilliant 9 out of 10. Number 2 on my list. This is the album that was the American only release that come between their second album, the one this one here, and the one which will be number 1. This is their third album, which wasn't a UK release initially. There are but 4 Small Faces. This was North American release. The album contains probably 7 or 8 tracks from their second album, which I've already mentioned on here. Plus there's a few standalone tracks. I'm not really a big fan of albums that have their own track listing in the US. They just don't work as good as the original UK releases, and it's probably the other way around as well. But this works better in my opinion, which makes a change. For British albums, basically getting new track listings and whatever in the US, this one is absolutely brilliant. You know, as much as I do love the 14 track UK version of the Small Faces, this one is a lot better. It seems to flow a lot better as well. I love the production. It seems to have been remastered or produced, whatever, differently for the American market. It does sound a lot better. Best track on here for me is I Feel Much Better. Has a Motown vibe to it. Starts off with an excellent bass riff, bass lines, and then goes and there's organ. There's a real Motown vibe happening with a touch of psychedelic. Absolutely brilliant. 9.5 out of 10. Now we have my number 1 album by the Small Faces. In fact, this album is my favourite album of all time. Ogdens Nut Gone Flake. I do have the original vinyl in its round cover like that. I also have the 20th anniversary little tobacco tin version on CD with all the little coasters in it. I also have this one from a box set called The Intermediate Years. It's a replica of the original album. And I have the 50th anniversary multi-CD set of this album. I just can't find the rest at the moment. They're still all packed away from when we moved. Anyway, 1968. This is the band's 4th and final release prior to Steve Marriott departing for greener pastures and forming Humble Pie, before they recruited Rod Stewart and changed their name to the Faces. Lots of heavy rock on here. There's soul, there's psychedelia, there's so-called not Cockney knees up type tunes as well. The second half of this album is a conceptual album. It's about a fictional boy called Happiness Stan, and he follows his quest to find the missing half of the moon that isn't in the sky. The tracks on the second half are interlinked with gobbledygook from British wordsmith Stanley Unwin. It's gobbledygook. His words mean nothing and they're all garbled up and jumbled up. I get it. It can be annoying for a lot of people, and even it wears quite thin every now and then when I listen to it, but overall it's just absolutely brilliant, absolute masterpiece. I've never heard anything else by Stanley Unwin only than what my dad used to tell me about him once he knew I had this album. So this is the only thing I have of his, so I don't know, years worth of whatever he did on UK TV with his gobbledygook. So this is all bright and fresh and new to me and quite original. To me, this is the greatest album ever recorded. It's absolutely magnificent. If you haven't heard it, go out and do yourself a favour. It's absolutely brilliant. This one comes in at 9.9 out of 10. No album comes in as a perfect 10 anywhere in the world. There's not absolute pure perfection. Anyway, guys, that's a quick run through of the 6 studio albums by my favourite rock band of all time, the Small Faces, and my favourite lead singer, vocalist, frontman of all time, Steve Marriott, and my favourite album of all time. So 3 out of 3 on this video for this band. Absolutely brilliant in my opinion. I think you guys should give them a bit of time, a bit of respect, and listen to more than just their compilation albums. There's a lot more to this band. If you like The Who, if you like The Jam, Paul Weller's a big fan, and these guys were the birth of Britpop. If you trace the origins back, according to all the Britpop stars, this is where it all began. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Stay safe, take care, all for now. Catch you around. Bye, folks.